had to be played because people on the sidewalks didn't just like to see a band marching to a marching beat. They wanted to hear music. So we all, to this day, know Washington Post, Stars and Stripes Forever.
Good morning, everybody. We are the Radio Rangers, and we'll start one out with an old Bill Monroe tune here called Big Sandy. Tony? 2, 3, 4.
We're pulling our music out of the 40s and 50s. We're trying to emulate what might have been heard at the time these things were popular.
You can still find classic 40s country music every Saturday morning, played live at Waterbury's WDEV. This is the latest incarnation of the Radio Rangers Band, a living artifact of Vermont's original love affair with local music.
We're the only locally sponsored, locally produced country music show. I don't know why there's another one. Not for a ways, I'll bet you. I think I played my first dance job probably about 1950, 51, but I was glued to that old round top radio from the time I can remember. And I don't know if I really knew what a fiddle was then, but I knew I was hearing something great.
The 40s and 50s saw Vermont coming into its own as a major year-round tourist destination with the rise of a number of theme attractions. One of the strangest was Bill Green's Rare Bird and Animal Farm. Big game hunter Bill Green offered the world's jungle animals to visitors in Fairleigh, Vermont. For the price of admission, you could meet Queenie, the water-skiing elephant.
We grew up together, and as time went on, we taught her how to water ski. She loved it. In fact, when I was water skiing with her, I had to be careful that she didn't get too rambunctious to tip us over. I grew up with this, so I didn't know enough to be scared. It was just something that I did every day.
While some early Vermont attractions were based on novelty, the majority of tourists still came to get a taste of the past. And though the traditional sites were still popular, the 40s and 50s saw the birth of Vermont's first history theme park.
This is a glimpse of Americana of the 18th and 19th centuries at the Shelburne Museum, founded in 1947 by Mr. and Mrs. J. Watson Webb to preserve and commemorate the traditions of early America.
I believe that we started on the school nearly first.
Clifford Francis was on the original museum construction crew.
I spent a good share of my life here, and it was more than just a job, it was a challenge.
Over the course of several years, a village materialized out of structures painstakingly moved to the museum grounds.
I discovered the covered bridge for her and persuaded her to bring it down to Shelburne as an entrance to the museum. And also a very fine 18th century house down in Cavendish.
And then it just went on and on and on. And also the Colchester Reef Lighthouse became available. Can you imagine? It was out there in the middle of the lake.
What is this, you ask? A lighthouse and a ship on the museum grounds 2 miles from the waters of Lake Champlain? That's correct. This is the famous side-wheeler Ticonderoga.
Of all the exhibits at Shelburne Museum, the most memorable is the spectacle of the landlocked steamboat Ticonderoga. Her odyssey is one of the most amazing anecdotes of the early 50s. By 1953, the Ti was at the end of her useful life. The last vestige of an era when lake travel was a practical necessity, she had become a seasonal tourist attraction.
The Ticonderoga used to run all summer long, particularly on weekends, and families would pile their kids on and go for a cruise up and down the lake.
But the Ti was on her last sea legs. Distressed at the possibility she might be scrapped, Lake Champlain historian Ralph Nading Hill found a savior.
Ralph went to Mrs. Webb and said, "You've got to buy it. It's a living museum, it's living history, it's the only one of its kind, the last of the side-wheel steamboats. There's none other left in the country. It's a beautiful thing."
And the rest, as they say, is history.
Then a plan was conceived to move the Ticonderoga overland intact, almost 2 miles, to a permanent resting place on the grounds of the Shelburne Museum. And finally, on the morning of January 31st, 1955, that cruise became the start of a ship's journey without precedent in the annals of seacraft. Drawn forward by a winch mounted on a heavy motor truck, 2 miles from this point, Oberlin to destination, the Shelburne Museum.
The cradle was on railroad wheels, and they'd pick up the rails back of the boat and put them down in front. They probably had a couple of 100 yards of rail.
They'd move them ahead and then move the boat and then take them off and move them ahead again. The winch was something that would move so slow that you could hardly tell it was moving, but it would still be moving.
They blocked off roads and had to take down wires to get it all the way up there. People driving along Route 7 see a big boat in the meadow and they think, what's that? That's the Ticonderoga.
That was very stirring. We used to go down and watch them inch along across the meadows, up the hill, to the final resting place.
This was journey's end for the Ticonderoga. After a fabulous and perilous overland voyage that took 65 days, 20 hours, and 28 minutes. A New England odyssey of epic proportions. And that is our story, the last voyage of the Ticonderoga.
The 50s saw Vermont's economy begin to lean ever more heavily on tourist dollars. Out-of-state visitors were suddenly flocking to places Vermonters had long taken for granted. Motorists passing through Brookfield discovered a floating bridge on Colts Pond, and any of the Woodstock Inn's 107 rooms offered a taste of country comforts with all the luxury of a grand hotel. In 1955, Dwight D. Eisenhower spent a well-publicized weekend fishing Vermont's Furnace Brook. Though the river had been specially stocked with trout to ensure the president's success, the only fish caught were by a handful of Vermonters fishing outside the security area.
Ike went fishing, couldn't catch a trout. All the trout that they put in up above had come down where I was fishing. I had never saw fishing so good in my life.
Locals recall the event as a kind of parable about the character of their state as it moved into those defining years of the 1950s. While Vermont was being drawn, for better or worse, into the American mainstream, she would damned well do it on her own terms. And if that meant things moving ahead a bit more slowly than the rest of the country, then so be it. That there would be change was understood, but how would that change affect us? Not even the wave of optimism and materialism sweeping post-war America could dislodge the things that Vermonters held dearest: family, community, and tradition. This was a time of simple pleasures and romantic innocence, a chance for Vermonters and anyone adventurous enough to venture here to enjoy an unspoiled way of life that would all too soon fade and be forgotten. Vermonters would always measure the opportunities of the present against their deep loyalty to the past. And if the present should ever catch up, well, at least there would always be the memories.